most people don't get up in the morning going, how can I go screw today up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Most people get up in the morning and want to do a really good job. That doesn't mean we're always going to make, the correct decision. Nobody just wants to, put money into something and then wonder whether they're getting a return on that or not.
Ladies and gentlemen, farmers, ranchers, and distinguished guests, thank you for listening to the Farm4Profit podcast, where we discuss the latest ideas, methods, trends, and techniques available to help your farm achieve higher levels of farm profitability. The Farm4Profit podcast is co-hosted by Tanner Winterhoff, the Iowa Bankerman, and David Whitaker, the Iowa Land Guy, where in tandem they will share their ideas and advice from industry experts. Thank you again for listening to the Farm4Profit podcast. Remember, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long. And now, here's Tanner and David.
Thanks again for joining us on the Farm4Profit podcast. This is Tanner here.
And this is David Whitaker.
We're having a lot of fun putting these episodes together. We're really appreciating the feedback that we're getting back from you as a listener, and we're loving that you're sharing this with your friends, family, neighbors, and anybody that you think could find a little value in it. And we overused the word excited the last time we were on, and I don't think it's going to change for this episode, Dave.
I don't think so. I tell you what, let's start it off today with a listener question, Tanner. We had this emailed to us. Of course, if you have questions, farm4profit LLC@gmail.com. Tanner, this week's listener question said, sometimes I feel like employees have no passion, no attention to detail, or motivation to do the right job. So I'm guessing, during these times, maybe we have that, but I then have to do it myself and fix it. Have you heard from your guests? What are they doing with this? Of course, farming. Tanner, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so it was a tough one for me to actually kind of think about, and we went outside the box on answering this question, which I'm excited to present our guest here in a little bit. But the thought is that nobody's going to do it as good as the owner of the farm. You almost have to have ownership in order to care, and I don't believe that philosophy. I do believe that there's an effective way to motivate employees and give them the motivation to bring value to your team and to your farm, ultimately making you more profitable. So we're going to jump right in there, Dave. Why don't you introduce who we've got on the phone today?
You bet. So on the phone today, we want to thank our guest speaker here, Jamie Pollard, who is the athletic director for Iowa State University for his 15th year here. And welcome, Jamie.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so Jamie has been kind of rewarded here for all the hard work that he's put in. In 2019, he was recognized as the 2019 Athletics Director of the Year by the National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics, the NACDA. He's also local here to Central Iowa. He and his wife, Ellen, have 4 kids. Thomas, who had some success in cross country, was Big 12 Newcomer of the Year in 2017. Annie, Maggie, and James, and we really appreciate him taking some time out of his day to help kind of relate this motivational efforts to staff and employees on the farm to how a head football coach can put a successful team together and run a staff like a well-oiled machine.
So I tell you what, Tanner, it sounds like we have a champion athletic director, I know we do, on the phone with us here on our podcast, and this just ties right into our listener question. And so, Jamie, we're gonna get right into it, and this question from one of our listeners is asking how to motivate his team to be better. I guess a question I have for you, just on the surface of just the basic question there, I'm sure that you've had the opportunity to motivate your team, and as the leader, that job probably changes. A lot of our farmers are the doers. They're the guy that actually drives the tractor, and they have to transition to be that leader. I'm guessing you had something similar to that.
Well, you don't fully stop and think you're leading, until sometimes you get into a position that, I call there's perceived leadership and actual leadership. And when you become the director of athletics, now all of a sudden everybody wants you to talk about leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And, with that, when I first started, that was really daunting because I hadn't really thought a lot about it. And now I've had 15 years in that role. And so, one, your leadership evolves. 2, you become much more acutely aware of, your responsibility, how leadership improves, how you can be better at it. But more importantly, what it's really taught me is the fact that you were leading when you weren't perceived to be a leader. And, everybody that works in an organization is typically leading somebody. but they don't always think of it because they think of the person on the top of the organization chart as the leader. And so, I think part of leadership is really understanding what all those people in the organization are going through and what they're doing individually to help lead the organization. And so for me, that leadership evolution and what motivates people is learning from the experiences I had when I didn't know I was leading when I actually was.
Now, that's the leading up mentality, the way to get that employee and that individual to believe that they can affect the direction, that they ultimately are affecting the direction the company, the business, the university goes. And that's something too. I mean, publicly, Iowa State University has been in the spotlight the last couple of years. Being a local, being right here close to Ames, have had the benefits of seeing its success historically, but really are hitting the national level due to a lot of the things that the athletics department has done for that university. So I want to kind of peel away the layers of this onion and ask you, is there something that you think, a key decision or a key leadership technique before we dive into comparing this to running like a football team that would contribute to the success Iowa State's having in sports across the board?
Well, number one, and there's not even a close second, is people. People. You got to have the right people in your organization, and that is the key to success. Whenever anybody starts in our department, whether I was involved in the hiring process or I wasn't directly involved, they get 30 minutes, I call it, on the couch in my office. And we just talk about, what makes somebody the right person at Iowa State, because most people kind of cringe when I say this, but I always say we don't have the best people in our athletics department. And most people look at me and go, what is he saying? And I always say, because there are a lot of really good people in this world, and they all don't live and work in Ames, Iowa for Iowa State University. So it'd be very disingenuous, it'd be very shallow for me to say, we've got the best people. Because whenever I hear people say that, I always think, okay, cliche, everybody says that. Mm-hmm. But what we've really focused on is, can we find the right people for Iowa State? Because if we get the right people for Iowa State, then they're the best people for Iowa State. And in the field I work in, Nick Saban, great football coach at Alabama, he may be an incredible coach, but based on what I know about him from what I've heard from others, is I don't think that style would work at Iowa State very well. And so just because he's maybe the best coach doesn't make him the best coach at Iowa State.
I see.
And so people is number one. And then number two, you do have to give them the tools and the resources. And so in our case, we invested a lot in our infrastructure, our facilities. We needed a lot of upgrades. And so you've got to give those good people the proper tools and then let them go do what they do. So I would say the keys to our success has been hiring the right people and then giving them the tools.
Let's talk on that for just a second. So to our farm listener that was out there that was asking, how can I encourage people to do better that are on his team? It sounds like for you guys, it was hiring the right people. I'm curious, did you guys hire for aptitude and technical skill of coaching, if you will, or did you hire for attitude? I hear a lot that I can teach you the job. You just got to have the right work ethic. I would assume, Tanner, that most of the people that were, farming for, maybe they don't know how to put in the new GPS on their tractor or something like that. I'm wondering, should our guys hire the people that have the technical skill, maybe not, they might have good attitudes, or do they hire somebody, better on attitude? What have you done, Jamie? Have you hired for the personality? It sounds like that 30 minutes is crucial in your department.
So I would say two things to that. First of all, during my 15 years, when I think back to, initially when I first started, and you come in and you're confident about your abilities. That's how you rose to a spot that they're going to hire you to be their leader. And when those first couple head coaches positions, football or basketball, came open, your natural tendency is to go back to the analytics and say, we're going to go out and hire the best possible person. And what I've learned over time is this notion of the right person is the best person, not the best person is the best person. And so that evolution has been probably more towards the right attitude, the right person to fit in our culture. And then I think you also have to stop on the second piece and just think about where you are as an entity, where you are as a farm, where you are as an organization. Is, if I'm hiring the head football coach at Iowa State, we definitely got to hire somebody that's, technically sound football wise. I mean, that isn't the place for them to learn.
Right.
Okay. But just because they're technically a great football coach, if they don't fit our culture and have the right attitude, they're going to be a bust. And so I would say in general terms, attitude is going to be a bigger piece of the equation to fit the culture. And that in theory, you can technically teach them the technical piece, or they can improve on the technical piece. Now that can vary. If you're hiring the, assistant marketing person, entry level position, yeah, you can take a bigger risk in teaching them the technical piece if they got a great attitude. I think I've got a pretty good attitude, but you don't want to hire me to be the head football coach. Okay?
No, I think that's great.
My technical ability just isn't going to be there.
Yeah.
And there's not going to be enough time, and we're too reliant upon that piece of our business to be successful for me to learn on the job.
Yep.
Right.
Make sense? So let me give you a real good life example of that then. When, the last two football coaches that we hired prior to Coach Campbell were two defensive coordinators, Gene Chizik, Paul Rhodes, okay? And they had never been a head coach, right? And part of it is, when you're at Iowa State and you're more on kind of the bottom of the power schools, a sitting head coach, you're not going to get a head coach from one of the teams that are ahead of you to come down and be your head coach. You're going to have to take somebody probably from a lower level. So there was always this feel that, well, you got to go get the next up and coming, coordinator that's at a big name school. Gene Chizik at Texas, Paul Rhodes was at Pittsburgh. And what I saw was that they were good technically as football coaches, but where they were not as strong, they weren't technically as good like in their leadership, right? Because they had to hire out a staff. They'd never been in that spot before where they have 40-some people reporting to them. And their ability to make decisions from a personnel standpoint, was challenged. And so the next time we did it, why we hired Coach Campbell, is we made the decision that what our organization needed was somebody who had been a head coach. And if that meant taking somebody at, quote, a lower level, meaning the MAC schools, then that was worth doing, because getting somebody in that had already hired staff, had already done with, those issues, they needed that technical qualification.
That is something that I can relate to what we've told our listeners before, is kind of doing a 360-degree review of their farm and knowing what your farm's going to need. You knew what Iowa State needed through your experiences. So there'll be gaps that you need to fill, and sometimes it is with attitude, sometimes it is with technical ability. But if we continue to do an effective 360-degree review on our farm and our business, that's going to help us know what type of person is going to be the right fit for us to get the right people inside our organization. But Jamie, sticking on the same theme of football as you're talking about Coach Campbell, let's see if we can't try and relate how, farmers are typically the people that are the doers. They grew up playing with the tractors in their living room. They grew up riding on their laps of their grandpas. And they grew up with that love of large equipment and animals and doing the daily tasks. And what I want to try to convey this message is that if the head football coach of the Iowa State Cyclones, in this case, we're talking about Coach Campbell, if he tried to do everything, I doubt that Iowa State University football would be where it is today. He's definitely taken the ability to delegate and created different roles on a college football team. Could you kind of shed some light to the listener as to what kind of staff members makes up a college football program?
Well, so, if I was to kind of look at the analogy and crossover to, farm. So the head coach, owner of the farm, and probably, the first generation owner, right? And ultimately, you said it, they got to that spot because they're a doer. And, football coaches, they, for the most part, all know football extremely well. But as you move up through the ranks and you become the head coach, you become that owner, it's less about milking the cows and knowing more about, what goes into, getting the right machinery, maintenance, depreciation, when am I getting, what's my cost benefit on a new combine, all those type of decisions that are unrelated to sitting in the seat of the tractor combining, right? Because you're the ultimate leader, and it's going to be less, in the football coaches world, it's going to be less about football and more about their ability to lead the people that are now doing what you used to do. And, so at the top, it's that business owner, that head coach, that's the ultimate leader, and it's less about the, the actual sport of football and more about, what am I doing to learn about leadership, managing people, personnel, budget management, PR, and so then you start to peel that onion back and you start to, get under the hood and try to compare, like what other positions then do you have under a head football coach, and, I'll rattle some off and then maybe we can dive into some of those.
That'd be great.
But, so obviously you got the head coach. They're going to have a director of football operations, which is kind of their administrative go-to person, that person that does a lot of the administrative busy work because they're the leader of the farm. They're the ones that, what people see as the leader, but then there's got to be somebody pulling all the strings and pushing all the buttons, and that's typical the day-to-day, the director of football operations. Then you've got the position coaches, that are very specialized for each of the positions on the football team, and that group of people's got to have a lot of technical skill, but they're also, as the head coach, you're also grooming them to be leaders too, because they are leading people as well. You've got a staff that, you got to go out and get talent. So the scouting department, the recruiting department, what are we doing to, watch film, to better ourselves, to make sure that we're bringing in the right people. Once you get them here, you got strength conditioning and nutritional folks that, what are we doing to help them get stronger, better? The science of the sport. Public relations marketing, you've got to, be on the outreach. You've got to be putting out great messaging. You've got to, put something out that recruits can see and fans can see and want to be part of. You've got people that are just breaking into the business that maybe are former players, and we had a couple this past year that were former players for us in the last couple of years that stayed around that are graduate assistants. So what are you doing to give back and to teach some new people, that are going to be future coaches? And then most importantly in the sport of football is the players, they're the ultimate really asset. And, I don't know what the player equivalent is. If the player is the cattle or the player is the corn or the soybeans,
right.
But, it's the actual, meat and potatoes of what we're trying to do. So, those are the pieces. And, if you want to dive into any one of those,
well, it would
talk
take
more about a farming analogy.
Yeah, I think we will. I think we will dive into that too. I mean, obviously it's going to take a rather sizable operation in order to have a equivalent to each one of those positions that you just described. But I want to go right back to the last analogy that you just made, is that the players is definitely, you have to make a sound decision when you are looking at the hybrids you're going to put in your fields. You're going to look at how you want to cross the genetics in your livestock herds. You kind of talked about the milking cows analogy earlier. If you don't have the proper genetics into that milk cow, she's not going to produce at the levels that you need to be profitable. So knowing what kind of talent you need to put on your farm as the player equivalent is going to be extremely key. And it may not be you as the farm business owner making all those decisions. It could be where you rely on a scout team or someone on your farm that helps with that. So what do you think, Dave?
Tanner, I'm just going to tag on real quick to what you're talking about. I think our listener question goes right to the player. Sometimes I feel like my employees have no passion. So just like Coach Campbell or Jamie has to instill encouragement and enable people to act in his job at whatever level they're at, I think it all comes down to the players. In this case, I think our listener has players that maybe aren't aren't encouraged to work or motivated to work. And so I'm going to go back to that original question. I think whoever that asked that, you need to be the coach. You need to be the coach and step back from the sidelines, realizing that, yeah, you want to be out there on the 1 yard line. However, you have to let your players do it, and you have to give them all they need to do it. So just wanted to interrupt you at the players portion if you want to keep going.
I like how we could tie that two different ways. The player person could fit the analogy in two different forms, and then the employees could also be the other staff members beneath the head coach. You could tie them both ways.
And Jamie, we talk about in Farm for Profit podcast here a lot about building a team, and that you can't do it alone. That it's such a big game, farming and agriculture is anymore. I related a whole lot to like your business and Iowa State University. We talk about having a good banker, a good realtor, having a good crop scouting person, working with the co-ops to make sure that you're getting the best grain marketing advice, insurance and crop insurance and government programs. There's so many moving parts. I would wonder, I would think it's very similar, but in the farming world, they're all disconnected, maybe not part of your operation. They all don't work for Iowa State. It might be this bank or that real estate firm or this whatever. And so you're bringing in allies to make your farm stronger. I'm curious, Jamie, I think the team environment, and we, both Tanner and I have said this a lot, is very, very important. How successful do you think your football team would be if you didn't have all those different cogs in the wheel?
Oh, it wouldn't be very successful at all. And as you were sharing that, what I was going through my mind were a couple thoughts. Is number one, whether they're in your organization or they're, if adjacent is the right word, but used a lawyer or a banker or somebody that's not in your organization, but they're part of that team. They're part of the cog. First and foremost, the most important thing is communication. Are you communicating regularly? Are you communicating effectively? Are you communicating efficiently so that everybody knows what's going on? Number two is, and this is probably more related to those within your organization, but it can be with, those people on the outside too, is, are you empowering people? Are you empowering people to act on your behalf by giving them responsibility? But then more importantly, are you holding them accountable for what they're doing for you? And I think a lot of people, some people struggle with empowering people and giving them responsibility because they don't want to delegate, right? But the worst thing you can do is delegate and not hold somebody accountable, because that will kill their motivation. And, if you were to talk to an employee, no one likes to be, called on the carpet or held accountable if you asked them. But if you didn't do it, they'll tell you in the end they don't like it. Because, you want to be told you're doing a good job. You don't want to be told you're not doing a good job. But you certainly want to be told you're not doing a good job if it's preventing you from doing a good job and getting the praise.
Yep.
And I think all of us have worked for leaders or managers at times that you don't get any feedback. And that may be the worst possible environment to ever be in, because I always say it's like paralysis. If you give something to the person above you and you get nothing back from them, it really stunts your desire to want to do it again next time, or certainly not do it on time or do it really well.
That kind of combines the director of football operations position with that PR is being able to communicate clearly what you're wanting done or the message that you want to get through. We did a whole episode, Dave and I did, on the power of communication and how that can affect farm profitability. I think that's a great example, Jamie.
And we talk about all these different players that it takes to make up the team, from the athletic director down, Tanner, all the way to the players. It takes everybody. And Jamie already told us without a team, it wouldn't be as successful. As a farmer, I'm going to think like a farmer for a second. It is hard for me to let my money go out the door and hire these people, because I feel like, hey, it's my way or the highway. I'm the ultimate decision maker. I don't want to let anybody else into my wheelhouse. I'm an introvert, and I don't really want other people to help. We talk about farm profitability. And when I look at the numbers, I'm like, I could hire a guy to do this, and he might actually make me more money. Maybe that insurance guy can make me more money. Maybe that crop scouting guy could give me some advice, maybe a different hybrid, etc. All those people, it's hard to make those decisions to spend more money. And Jamie, you're in charge of hiring people and building your team to what you need. I got to assume, as you as a leader and relating to our farmers as leaders, when they decide to make those decisions, when they decide we need to hire more people, we'll be more profitable if we do, have you seen that by giving, if Coach Campbell says, I need 3 more guys to do this, you got to watch the budget, of course, but you're able to make those decisions, and you're all about giving people what they need to be successful, encouraging others to act and empowering them, correct?
Yes, you are. And that again goes back to hiring the right people. Because when you're at a place like Iowa State, our margins here are going to be more like the smaller farmer than the big operation that can just throw money at things.
I see.
Right, and so we have to be very strategic, deliberate, thoughtful about what we're doing. But that kind of goes back to the hold people accountable, and because you could throw a lot of money at it and have a lot of people around, but it's run really inefficient because you got people that are sitting around maybe not working as productively as they would. The old adage, if you want something done, give it to the busiest person, right? Because they're busy probably for a reason, right? And the person that's sitting around that you could give it to every single day, there's a reason they're just sitting around because, no one wanted to give them anything.
Right.
So different levels of leadership, so if Coach Campbell comes to me and I've seen how he's operated things, I know he's holding people accountable and he's getting, good results, I'm going to be more apt as the leader to want to support him,
right,
and provide him those resources because I know there's going to be a good return on it. But again, that goes because I'm giving him the responsibility, but I'm also holding him accountable, and I think that's a big part of that of resource management is just being able to figure out. Nobody just wants to put money into something and then wonder whether they're getting a return on that or not.
That kind of really ties back to what our listener's original question was, that they feel like their employees have no passion, no attention to detail, and no motivation. Yeah, that's kind of part of how Coach Campbell's scouting and recruiting program has really shown through. By putting extra dollars and staff into that scouting and recruiting program, he's definitely shown that their ability to grab higher levels of talent, create a more competitive football team, and get them to be the right fit for his football culture is certainly shown that it's very advantage to Iowa State University.
Tanner, I think this goes to the number one thing I wrote down on my paper. We always take notes, Jamie. I'm taking notes. The number one thing I wrote down was key to success is people. Right there from your athletic director. Maybe he has the wrong person in his farm operation that doesn't want to be motivated. It might be that he's not motivating him, but we need to make sure that we have the right people for the right jobs. So,
right, and so to be respectful of your time, Jamie, you kind of hinted that effective delegation is something that helps leaders become great or makes great leaders great themselves. When you started to get into roles in which you could delegate and you had to just due to time and sheer workload, what was something that kind of helped you get good or get better at that task in practicing?
Well, it goes back to having the trust to empower people. Most people get up in the morning. I always say this. Most people don't get up in the morning going, how can I go screw today up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Most people get up in the morning and want to do a really good job. That doesn't mean we're always going to make, the correct decision. And so one of the things that, I've found with my staff was, I just told them, because when I started, had been an environment where everything came to my desk, and it was stifling for me because I couldn't get out from behind the desk.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I always would tell them that if it lands on my desk to have to make a decision, it better be something that 51% would do this and 49% would do that. And I have to scratch my head and go, why am I the athletics director? But if it comes in and it's, 100% of the people would make this decision, then I always say, well, then somebody in our organization didn't make the decision when they had the chance. They just passed on the problem, right? And so when you empower people to make decisions and they know, and this is the key, they know you've got their back. Whether they make the exact opposite decision you would have made, but I know they made it with, they thought they were making the best decision, then I got to have their back.
Right.
And if you do that, what you'll be surprised with is how they'll make better decisions more often than not. And they'll be empowered and want to make the decisions and not put them on your desk because they know you support them and you trust them.
Right.
And that's when your organization really starts clicking, because then things, it's not even like you're delegating it. They've kind of taken it for you.
Yeah, that's a great point. The fact that they gain more confidence too with every decision that they make, and not that you're giving them the approval, but communicating with them what they could have done better, what you liked about what they did, and putting that all together. But another thing that we've noticed on effective leaders, Jamie, is how efficient people are with their time. One way to make a business more profitable is to do more with the time that you have or the available resources that your team has. You know, obviously, being a part of a state university, you have limited resources. Could you share with our listeners something that might be passable to them as to how you gained efficiencies or the way you look at looking for efficiencies?
Well, Coach Campbell and I have talked about this a lot over the last year as he's evolved as a leader. And you said it earlier is, you take somebody like Coach Campbell and you say, why did he have success initially? It's because he just works really hard. He's got a big engine, passionate. He's obviously bright. He's good at what he does. Okay. But at some point you get diminishing returns because, and I'll cite an example. Last year we go to play K-State. We knew it was going to be a really tough game at the end of the year. K-State's much like us, very disciplined program. And Matt hunkered down that week so hard. They stayed in the staff room an extra hour every night. They worked their tails off that week. And we came out and just had an atrocious game, got taken to the woodshed. We just weren't, we were flat. We weren't prepared. And as we kind of looked at that after the fact, what you started to realize was that at some point the leader can't, you've led to this point by saying, having everybody around you do as I do. Okay. At some point, you got to move to a whole nother level of leadership where you're able to look and say, don't do as I do. I'm going to help you understand why I do what I do. And that takes me, in Matt's case, get out of the defensive coordinator room, get out of the offensive coordinator. Don't stay an extra 2 hours that week of the game because all you're doing is it's diminishing returns. You need to be out of that room, spending time looking at other things you could do within the organization that are going to make you more efficient. So going back to use of your time, as your organization grows, your organization gets better, you can't just keep doing what you always did. You've got to continue to grow as a leader. And if that's, I think a big part of it for me is professional development, reading, trying to figure out what, learn from others. And then be able to bring that back and apply it in your organization so that you get some of those efficiencies. But that's tough to do as a leader, and it's tough to do in a very task-oriented business like farming or like being the head football coach.
Yeah.
Because your tendency is just do, I'm really good, and if I only had 6 of us, we'd be awesome. Okay?
Yep.
And I had one of my staff say when I said that one time, they said, if we had 6 of you, we'd all go off the cliff without a parachute. Okay? So, and that was good for me to hear because, I had to step back and say, okay, I can't keep doing what I'm doing if I really want to grow the organization. I got to think about how I can grow myself as a leader to help our organization grow. I
got you. I want to back up one thing you said a little bit ago is you talked about when you empower your people to make good decisions that then you back them to go with that. Our farmers have a huge generational gap happening right now. One is, not to lead us down a whole different road here, just one is that we have the baby boomer generation that was when dad said jump, you say how high. You don't ask why. And now we have the younger generation coming in that they just want to be part of the team, explain why we're doing it that way. And you said, back their decision even when they make it. Do you think that's important for our farm leaders to, as they work with their kids, a lot of family organizations here, to not tell their kids to just jump and not get them in? Or do you think it's better as a leader to bring people into the decision-making process?
I think it's good to bring them into the decision-making process. I'm thinking about it, and one, I didn't grow up on a farm, so I can only speak from afar, not directly. But I'm going to guess, just think of what's gone through from a technology standpoint. Just combining when, you used to ride an open tractor and you had to steer it And, that seemed hard work was what determined efficiency, right?
Right.
Who could work the longest? And then, little Johnny or little Susie went off to college and started learning about, hybrids, learned about GPS, learned about other ways to be more efficient on the farm, and brought those technologies and those ideas home to mom and dad. And I'm sure there, were generational struggles about, we're going to invest that kind of money in that, with GPS, what the heck's that?
Yeah.
Right.
And so, I don't know what the future holds, but there's no reason to believe there's not going to even be more technology and, more need to be more efficient in the uses of our land. And so you've got to listen. You've got to bring those people, the younger generation, into the decision making if you want to have sustainability. That'd be my take.
Yep.
No, very good. And one of the things that we'd like to do on every one of our episodes is ask our guests, and it'll be a little bit different phrased question for you, Jamie, than our ag industry related guests. We like to ask them what the most common characteristics are of the most successful farmers that they do business with. So I want to kind of paraphrase that question for you. What do you notice are the most common differences between winning programs and those that haven't had successful histories?
Number one, and again, similar to people, there's probably not a close second, is culture.
Culture.
A culture of success, a culture of camaraderie, a culture of we're in it for the right reason. Culture shows up in adverse times. A lot of organizations, a lot of farms can probably do great when it's prospering times,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But when we're in tough times, the cream will rise to the top, and the cream usually is directed by culture. And, who has put in place an organization that the organization is, in some ways, the culture is bigger than the individual people. And that's what I see is, the successful athletic programs are the ones that just have a culture and, I'll give you a great example here in our athletics program. We were hailed for being kind of a leader in that, we stood up right off the bat and everybody took a 10% pay cut for a year so that we could not lay anybody off, keep everybody together. So when we got through this COVID, whenever that, evolves through, that we're still all here as an organization and we're the most efficient and we're the most ready to prosper again. And we had numerous people, other schools, reach out to us and say, well, how did you get that done overnight? I mean, was that in their contract, or how did you get it done? And, our lawyer on campus, we kind of joked and said, the real answer is it started 15 years ago. It's called culture. You don't just write it into a contract. You bake it into the process of what it's like to work here. So hands down culture.
So that sounds like a big task to our listener. What if they have doubts in themselves that they couldn't create a culture like this, or they don't have the abilities to run a successful farm? Do you have any advice for them or for that person who might think that they can't do this, that they aren't the one to jump into a role like this?
Well, that's a tougher question because, everybody's wired differently.
Mm-hmm.
But, I always just go back to, and Coach Campbell uses the word process is, we all want to have this vision and everybody, fans, people want to talk about, where we're going, what are we trying to accomplish? But more often than not, the excitement from the accomplishment pales in comparison to the enjoyment that comes from the process. And, if you find something you're good at and you have a passion for it, I just believe you can develop that great culture by just, working hard, working smart, being a good person, being efficient about what you're doing. And, that over time, by just doing it right every day consistently is what builds that culture. Culture isn't something you decide that tomorrow we're going to have a good culture.
Yep.
Culture is working hard every single day and maybe not even realizing much moved until you look back and go, oh gosh, how far did we go in the last year? Or what did we accomplish this fall? And, people can get so caught up in the vision and then they get intimidated by that vision because they think I could never do that.
I got you.
And they've, a great leader paints a vision, but then you got to get the culture that gets there, because you can't just say, well, we're going to win the Big 12. If I would have said that on my first day I got here, and then people are going, well, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years later, 6 years, you haven't won it. Well, then you failed. And you go, no, you didn't understand. The vision is that's what we aspire to do, but you got to build a culture, and that culture doesn't happen overnight to get there. Now, here we are 15 years later, now we're knocking on the doorstep, but everybody along the way, whether it was Coach Chiswick, Coach Rhodes, Coach Campbell now, have all played a part in getting us there. And we can now look back and go, wow, we came this far.
Right.
Well, that's great. That's great. I tell you, I'm going to go through a summary of kind of what we did, and we'd like to challenge everybody, our listeners. Jamie, think of any last comments or words of advice that you'll share with the listeners as I go through this. For the listeners, as Jamie talked today, as our listeners said, sometimes we feel like our employees might have no passion. And how do we encourage the heart? How do we model the way, enable others to act? And sometimes it's even challenge the process that we do. So sometimes our farm acts like a football team, from head coach to directors to position coaches, scouting, recruiting. There's strength, nutrition, public relations. There's a lot of different players, from administrative down to the hard workers in our system. Whether you're running a football team, running Iowa State University athletic department, or you're running your farm, it takes lots of people to be involved in that decision-making process. Jamie said it best. The two takeaways that I took were that you have to create a culture of how you want your organization to be led, and that does not come overnight. The number one thing that's a takeaway for me, if you're listening, is that it's the people that you hire and how you interact with those people and communicate with those people to make them motivated to make your team great and successful. And so leading and trusting and listening to the others and including them in your action plan. It sounded like over the last 15 years, Jamie's had an action plan, but he had specific tasks to be able to create that culture. The action plan could be related to your culture, but you had to have specific tasks to get you along the way. So thanks, Jamie, for all the camaraderie and Go State, I'll say, on top of that. But do you have any last comments or words of advice for our listeners?
Well, I'd leave the listeners with this, and it's something we always start and end any of our all-staff meetings with, which is it's an easier phrase to say. It's a hard phrase to live out, but it's ultimately when you accomplish what you set out to achieve, remember who you were, because that's who you still are. Mm-hmm. And, the real, meaning of that is, when you ultimately have that success, remember what your core values were, because so often people, organizations, they change, and I work in a profession that, people want to hail the head football coach when they're really successful. And those coaches can start to think they're invincible, and then they move away from those values that defined our culture. And so one of my jobs as the leader is to kind of make sure I keep everybody, in check, that I keep everybody 2 feet on the ground with our values. So that saying is, when you ultimately achieve what you set out to accomplish, so you've had that success, remember who you were, because ultimately that's who you still are.
That's fantastic. No, that's really great advice, Jamie. And with all sincere thanks, we do appreciate you spending your time with us today on this podcast. I challenge our listeners that now when you get to watch football for the next time, that you think about your farm a little bit differently. Think about the amount of communication that it takes to get that message from point A to point B. Make sure that the message sent and heard can get all the way to full functionality on your farm and help work towards establishing that culture that you need to make your farm successful. So I got a lot of things that'll be in the show notes for you under the challenge section, but my main thing is from Jamie today, and thank you again for sharing that with our listeners, is work on that culture, work on your vision and the ability to communicate that to others, and empower your employees to put that together. So those will be the challenge items today too. And if you like this or have any other ideas for podcast episodes, please share those with us, Farm4Profit LLC at gmail.com. But again, thank you, Jamie, and to the listener. Until next time, we hope you tune in.
Remember, if you aren't farming for profit, you won't be farming for long.